So I'm going to tell a little tale of our team and our enterprise team and how we came about, how we decided to, and the adventures of developing our UX ROI at our enterprise company. So today, we'll talk a little bit about what is enterprise land, and I'll tell you a little bit about our team's story. We'll talk a little bit about what happened in enterprise land as we began on this quest and what we learned, and how we didn't kill each other, and there were questions at times. And then there'll be lots of time at the end for questions. So welcome to enterprise land. Show of hands, how many of you have seen the 80s movie, The Princess Bride? Awesome! The pure power of our geekiness in this room could probably light up the entire city. It's a wonderful, beautiful thing. So I love this movie. It's one of my favorites. And for those of you who haven't seen it, let me try to give you a little bit of a summary. So it's basically a story within a story, and it begins with a grandfather who goes to visit his sick grandson who's stuck at home in bed. And to connect with him, he tells him the story of Wesley and Buttercup. Two young lovers in a fairy tale land far away who find each other, lose each other, and they finally find each other again. But it's also about the people they meet and the adventures they all share along the way. So you ask, and I'm sure everyone's still looking at me like, what is she talking about? Why am I talking about a Rob Reiner-directed fantasy romance movie at a UX conference? Well, give me a second. I'm going to get you there. Let me explain. I work with a small but mighty team of 12 UXers at an enterprise software company called ADP. You may know ADP as the payroll company. If you've ever gotten a physical check or even direct deposit and a receipt for your wages, you've probably seen ADP's name on your check. And our team works at one of ADP's innovation centers in Pasadena, California. Our primary focus is on reinventing and improving the compliance process for payroll practitioners. And by compliance, I mean, for example, making sure companies pay their taxes on their employees' wages, or identify and deduct garnished employees correctly, or even help companies calculate their deductions and tax credits to adhere to the Affordable Care Act. Our team is fairly new to the organization. We've been there about a year and a half together, a year and 8 months. And we come from various backgrounds, from startups to academia. And for our team of UX professionals, especially those members of our team who are new to an enterprise environment, working at ADP can feel like working in another world. With its fiefdoms, and its unknown dangers, its special terms and languages, royalty, and pirates. But our team figured that, just like most foreign countries, half the battle was getting to know and understand the people. That includes those within the castle walls, as well as those who use the enterprise land products and services. On the surface, this seemed easy enough, since empathy for and interest in people, who they are and how they behave, that's baked into the DNA of most UXers. So we immediately began interviewing our internal subject matter experts and our internal stakeholders, and going out into the field and cross-functional teams to observe our practitioners. However, what we discovered as we embarked upon the first major redesign in 10 years of the foundational compliance platform made us re-examine our original approach. The truth was that between the various siloed business units and product teams, no one really had a clear view of the current cross-product platform experience from the user's perspective. So as the teams discussed and considered what this could mean for our redesign efforts, we really began to realize we actually had a unique opportunity. Prior to our redesign, if we could identify our users' top tasks, we could create a benchmark by measuring their attitudes, behaviors, and processes related to those key tasks. Then, if we could collect those same measurements as a point of comparison after the redesign, we might be able to reframe entire future conversations. Taking it a step further, since we were already talking crazy, if we could show a connection between our users' post-redesign experience and company success metrics, we could potentially quantify our team's value and impact on the organization. So with these lofty goals in mind, we took on the quest of developing a UX and ROI measurement plan for our enterprise team. Storyline. The beginning of our team's quest started with the UX research team sifting through various articles and books, workshop materials, and research reports by authors such as Tom Tellis and Bill Alpert, Jacob Nielsen, and Jeff Sorrow. And for the most part, they all outlined a few theoretical steps to developing a UX measurement plan. Having worked at several different consumer-facing companies, I knew these steps were difficult to achieve even in those kinds of organizations. But in enterprise land, they seemed almost inconceivable. However, undeterred, we set off optimistic and determined, just like our story's hero, Wesley the stable boy, toward the first step of our adventure. Meeting the main characters. So the team understood that conducting the first step in our journey, clarifying our representative audience, would require overcoming really two major obstacles. First, in enterprise land, recruiting even small numbers of participants for qualitative research, as most of you know if you work in enterprise, can be a real struggle. And the team had already faced hurdles such as limitations to client access due to sales teams' concerns, restrictive company policies regarding security and privacy, and just even seasonal availability of our representative users. And we knew that potentially recruiting hundreds of participants for a quantitative study was going to require some real magic. Second, while the organization basically understood their primary compliance user to be a payroll practitioner, the team's field research had begun to reveal other leading characters. In fact, the payroll practitioner could be one individual in a smaller organization, or in larger companies, she could be several individuals, each performing small, specific subtasks of an entire workflow. This insight increased the need for a client list if we were going to conduct quantitative research with complete and up-to-date descriptive information related to each contact name. Our team was lucky enough to have an intrepid research recruiter who took on the task of working with the various sales teams to find just the right client list. At nearly the 11th hour, she miraculously found a credible version. She also managed the job of scrubbing and filtering the client opt-outs to meet canned spam requirements, negotiating with finance and legal to procure approved incentives, as well as synchronizing the distribution of recruiting emails to ensure we met our response quotas. Learning the native tongue. Most enterprise UXers learn quickly that an important factor in speaking enterprise land language is data. But just like our heroine Buttercup's initial confusion that Wesley's "as you wish" actually meant "I love you," enterprise KPIs can be hard to decipher. Simultaneously, some UX folks can be metric phobic, but our team realized that getting a seat at the round table, I know I'm mixing medieval metaphors, but go with me on this, you know what I mean, required having a clear understanding of the next step in our quest, the most important company KPIs. Since we were all still new to enterprise land, this information wasn't really easy to find. So we educated ourselves. We read company blogs, stock reports, executive email announcements, and watched corporate videos. Eventually, we were lucky enough to find an overlap between the KPIs of the compliance division president and ADP's CEO. Searching for the six-fingered man. Much like one of our hero Inigo Montoya's lifelong search for the six-fingered man who killed his father, our search for exactly the UX metrics kept us asking infinite questions. Which UX metric would best capture the influence our team could make on the product? Which UX metric would best reflect the changes we hope to make in the product over the future? And just freaking which UX metric are going to make the most sense to executives? And a lot's been written about usability metrics and standard measurement instruments like the SUS and the TAM and the QUIS and even Net Promoter. But each of these tools measures something slightly different in terms of aspects of usability and satisfaction. And some are better suited for websites as opposed to enterprise software. In the end, we decided on somewhat of a scattershot approach, and we combined several tools while isolating key questions from others. And after a lot of discussion, and with some reservations, because the NPS is actually more of a customer experience and a market research instrument, but we decided to go ahead and include it. We knew that our customer experience team was also gathering that NPS data on our user service and product experience, and we reasoned that this would allow us some foundation to compare and contrast some results. Telling the user's story. Crucial part of any UX measurement and ROI plan is conducting top task identification research and then following up with a benchmark study. Completing these two steps allowed us to tell our users' story by clarifying first their primary tasks and attitudes about those tasks, and then measuring their task-based performance. The top task research provided the opportunity for us to focus in on our users' most highly prioritized tasks and defocus on the smaller tasks that mattered less. And this was a huge step for the company because of the siloed nature of the organization to really actually have this kind of data for the first time. And we accomplished this through creating an online survey where participants were required to rank not only the steps in their process, but also the specific task and order of importance and their satisfaction with those steps and those granular tasks. The remote unmoderated benchmark study portion allowed us to measure our users' current performance and satisfaction on the same key tasks identified in the top task management survey. It also established a baseline to compare against and track the progress for future iterative design efforts. And we felt strongly that a quantitative approach would provide insights in a manner that balanced well with our qualitative efforts, but would allow us to leverage and explain our impact with numerical data, which can sometimes be easier to explain than qualitative data, especially as stakeholders. Making alliances. An essential part of traveling on any quest is having appropriate allies. And the same is true when developing a UX measurement plan. We knew that a step of mapping our UX metrics to company KPIs would require the help of a real heavyweight. So it was crucial for the success of our quest to join forces with the CFO. She was new to enterprise land, and she'd been tasked with aligning revenue metrics across the various siloed ADP divisions. So she became a vital alliance in terms of translating finance language and helping us focus in on more explanatory organizational KPIs. And we also joined forces with the new customer experience VP, whose team had recently been given the task of establishing revenue standards related to sales and service metrics like sales growth and retention and cost per customer contact, and of course NPS. Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. We knew that our research efforts were pointless if we didn't have a solid plan to improve the compliance platform experience. A key part of making our benchmark research actionable was to work with product management teams to influence the product roadmap. Many of us have experienced product roadmaps that end up being nothing more than a never-ending list of disjointed features and functionality, and none making a significant improvement on users' highly prioritized end-to-end task or most important needs. So, to prevent the top task data from being translated immediately into features, we advocated for first clarifying our users' unmet needs, and to allow the UX team to have a proactive influence on the product roadmap, we suggested a series of collaborative workshops. And in conjunction with our product partners, we could work together to map the identified top tasks to the user need themes we had identified from our qualitative field research. Then, combining both the qualitative data from our ethnographic field research and the behavioral data from our benchmark study, we propose asking why, how, with who, and when our end users were conducting these tasks. This process would provide the opportunity to look for gaps and assess whether proposed features and functionality on the current product roadmap align with our users' most important needs and priorities. Stable boy to dread pirate Roberts. So we basically had two main goals for our UX measurement and ROI plan. One, of course, was to help establish the organization's return for investing in a UX team by reflecting the connection between the redesign, user experience improvements, and company KPIs. And the other was to measure our team's ability to positively impact the company culture by fostering innovation with design thinking, methods, and practices, and the commitment to a user-centered design process. One reflection of that impact will be seen in the comparison phase of our ROI initiative. In this phase, we'll collect the same metrics as in our benchmark in an effort to reveal differences, either positively or negatively, reflected by our redesign efforts. We'll also examine how those changes might have affected company KPIs, either positively or negatively, such as NPS, sales growth, call center contact volume, and quarterly retention. Additionally, we'll also re-examine the influence of our UX team's innovation efforts on the ADP brand. For example, activities such as patents filed for, design thinking training sessions, conference talks, articles published, all by our team members. Rescuing the princess. One of the final steps in our measurement plan requires really narrowing down on all the UX and company KPIs gathered and determining which metrics show the strongest and best explanatory relationship to company KPIs. So, to accomplish this, both the UX and company-wide KPIs will be examined to answer a few key questions, like which company KPIs demonstrate the strongest relationship to UX efforts? Which company KPIs should we emphasize versus those we should de-emphasize has the best reflection of UX impact going forward for the future? And then compared to the benchmark, what degree of difference in the redesign UX metrics can reasonably be expected in the future? Since, of course, that difference between the benchmark, because nothing had been done in 10 years, and the first impact or the first redesign will be the largest difference, but moving forward, is it rational to expect that same percentage of difference? The never-ending story. Once our comparison research is conducted and analyzed, we know the story won't be over. To truly stay aware of the impact design efforts are having on the product, we understand that we'll need to establish a regular cadence for conducting our UX benchmark studies. This will allow us to continuously re-examine and collect these measurable metrics on the impact the UX team is having on our end user experience and the company, KPIs. Our travels in enterprise land and what we learned along the way. So at this point, you're probably thinking that the story of our UX measurement process went along smoothly, and there were no hiccups, there were no bumps, we all held hands and sang kumbaya, there was no setbacks. That's not what happened. That's not what happened at all, unfortunately. Our team ran into problems from the very start of our journey. We had trouble finding controlled test environments. So to precisely control our study results, especially task time and completion rates, Our original study design called for a test environment pre-populated with dummy data that we would take remote and moderated and remote unmoderated participants through. But because engineering was preparing for the release of the redesign, test environments became difficult to find. One that was promised to us was taken away at the 11th hour. So ultimately, we had to create UX metrics that would compensate for the wide variations in our users' experience and concede to each participant using their own working platform for the research. There was also the looming threat of the redesign release date. The entire study, from top task identification to the remote unmoderated benchmark, was conducted in about 10 weeks. Unfortunately, the redesign release was a scheduled date, and once the old experience went away, that was it. Users wouldn't have any access to it any longer. And the whole point was to be able to baseline where they were to show where we had taken them to with the redesign. So we knew we had to act fast. It required a lot of late nights, lost weekends, and somewhat authoritarian project management on my part. All this was happening while our small 4-person UX research team was also juggling other research projects, each with their own looming due dates, their own waiting designers, and their own development resources. Each time the team thought we'd identified and resolved a hurdle, a new one appeared to take its place. As for help from the UX community, although there were a lot of folks talking about UX ROI in the UX world, when we reached out to find questions, we found very few teams that really could discuss the specifics of how they handled impediments, how they set up their metrics, what company KPIs they used. So we didn't get a lot of really help. In fact, few teams had even actually reached the point where they could identify their users' end-to-end tasks and come to any kind of agreement within the organizations. At one point, I may be wrong, but I think my UX research team might have wanted to do me bodily harm. I could be wrong about that. Mostly dead is slightly alive. Despite a few blow-ups, a cracked tooth, it was mine. When I'm stressed out, I chew ice, and people were yelling at me, and I just kept chewing more ice, and I cracked a tooth, but it's fine. There were infinite compromises, and there were trade-offs, but we all managed to get through it, and we survived. In fact, once we began to share and disseminate our findings across the organization, we started to hear, dare I say, perhaps for the first time, more productive and informed and holistic discussions about our process, about our products, and based on real data. We know it's only the start, but we've seen a significant change to the previous more siloed product approach we had encountered when our team first came to the organization. Even within the team, we've started to refer to the top tasks for recruiting criteria, as well as key areas to explore in field research, as well as usability sessions. So finally, if you decide to take on the quest of developing a UX measurement plan and ROI metric for your company, good luck, and have fun storming the castle. We've got 10 minutes for questions, 15 minutes for questions. So there's a lot of information, sounds fun and allegorical. It was really like a small little chunk of hell. So any questions?
Hi, I am curious how you shared out your findings with such a large organization.
We shared our findings. We had an executive stakeholder. My boss's boss was the one who foot the bill for the software and the consultant to do the statistical analysis, and we started first with him. So we did share out of the data, and he said, that's too much sausage making. So we actually kept refining and condensing it to begin to share it with different people. And my supervisor is great. She's a great networker and across the organization. So really, she kind of created a plan for, here are the different people.
They can't hear you. I'm back.
Sorry. She created a plan for the different people in the organization who we needed to start with in terms of sharing out the information. After it was our executive stakeholder, it was the product VP. And then once everybody kind of got it and we got some support for it, we went to the GM. Then the GM and the CFO were excited by it, so they brought in other CFOs. So it was really a process of slowly rolling it out and getting certain people to buy into it. And the CFO, as I mentioned, was new. So for her, the idea of actually establishing uniform KPIs and revenue amounts related to those KPIs was something she was very excited about. So it was a small process of step-by-step getting people to buy in and then having them almost refer us to somebody else to share the information.
So was it mostly in these one-on-one meetings, or did you create artifacts that you posted online somewhere? Or?
No, well, actually, that's wrong. We started with some blogs. We have an internal blog, and we started with just really talking about the process and the different steps. What I didn't talk about here in this presentation is we also did an internal heuristic and cognitive walkthrough as the UX research team. And so we did that process as well, and we created a poster. I worked with an intern who is working at our company right now with our team, and she created a data visualization of that heuristic. And so that also became part of our blog. So really, we were kind of not necessarily intent on sharing it. We didn't know who was going to accept it or reject it. But we just slowly were rolling out the information. Because it's such a huge organization, we started sharing it bit by bit. It was almost strategic in a way of just trying to get people to be excited and interested to see where else it would drive us.
Thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, I have a question about how did, once you've mapped out or identified the key KPIs, how did you decide where to make design changes that you thought would be the most effective in making positive change to those KPIs?
Well, we actually didn't start with making the KPIs associated with the design changes. We started with the top tasks. Once we understood the top tasks, we actually were focusing in on, for the redesign, how can we redesign toward those end-to-end top tasks? And it was a struggle because the product teams really wanted to focus in on pet product features. And so we had to start with, and like most redesigns, it's Frankenstein. It's not like the whole thing is redesigned at once. There are key elements that are going to be redesigned. And we started with the top tasks, looking across these products, knowing that a lot of our payroll practitioners don't just work with one product. They might do something with employment tax, and then they might go to wage garnishment, so they're moving all around. So we really tried to think of the task end to end, and then we actually started thinking more about the KPIs as we reached out to different areas of the organization to understand even overarchingly what company KPIs were, because again, each of these different divisions are very siloed, so it wasn't like it was one uniform KPI. Each division had their own KPIs, and we had to do the work to try to see how they rolled up to this ADP-wide CEO's KPIs.
So I want to follow up on this. So if you've identified the top tasks, and your hypothesis is that if you target those top tasks, you're going to infect those KPIs, but until you actually get the resources to say, no, you have to change these. It's a little bit of a chicken and the egg.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? After the fact, you might be able to say, yeah, we were effective, but how do you get people to change those top tasks up front before you've actually shown to them that this is going to get the right ROI?
So what let me try to see if I understand your question, is are you asking what the relationship is between the KPIs and the top tasks?
A little bit. I mean, I could see how I think you can make a general argument and say, you know what, these are our top tasks. If we get these right, we're probably going to affect our KPIs. But if someone disagrees with you, you're just stuck going, well, I think it's the right thing to do. Let's do it. And after the fact,
yes.
Now we can show whether it
At
works.
that point, because there was no agreement, and it was the first time it was ever done, if we tried to wait, which we did at first, try to wait for some kind of collective, holistic, cross-platform agreement, we would have gone nowhere. So we had to actually start and take that initiative upon ourselves to think of it from the user's journey end to end versus waiting for some collective agreement that would have never come.
That's where I see the chicken and egg.
So,
Because people will say, well, what, we don't agree with you, show us how that's going to affect our end results.
and they have, and what I've said is, show me what other data you have that disagrees with the data that we have. Right now, we can tell you, we can start with this, and it's not an end. As we actually go through the process of doing our regular benchmark studies, we can look at, are these top tasks, have they changed at all? Can we cross-correlate that with any of our qualitative research? But we had to start somewhere. And before, it was really just every separate product's own opinion. And our argument is, you have an opinion, do you have any data? Well, we have some data. When you bring in your data that actually gives more information, then we'll have a discussion.
So I had a question about your KPIs. So on the slide where you had the company KPIs and how UX KPIs might correlate, are you able to tell us which of those KPIs actually move the most and how
Not
you were?
until we do the comparison study.
Okay, so
we
you're
actually
still
haven't done the
waiting.
comparison study. It's
Okay.
scheduled for May. We had to actually give users, we literally released the redesign the day after we closed our benchmark study. That's how close we were. So on December 19th, we closed our study at 5 o'clock, and then at midnight, the development started pushing out the new design. So we wanted to give our users 5 months, 6 months to acclimate. People hate change, especially enterprise workers. We knew they were going to be unhappy. So we wanted to give them 6 months to acclimate before we started actually looking at those same metrics after the redesign. And then it will be an iterative process, which is why the relationship and the alliance with the CFO was so important, because some of those company KPIs, we're going to have to say, we haven't seen any real impact. Like retention and churn are closely connected to each other. Retention churn is the kind of the opposite of retention. So I actually worked with her, and then she had 3 bosses up the line. This is a big company. So to say, are these metrics even in the ballpark? Is sales growth one we should look at? So it's going to be an ongoing relationship as we look at our UX metrics, and then we look at the impact we've potentially had from the baseline on the company KPIs. So we won't really be able to answer that question until after our second comparison benchmark study, comparison to the redesign.
Hi, Vinny from UPS here, and I have a question about the methodology that ADP uses for system development. Is it a waterfall or is it agile? And when you did your study, was it based off of your system development lifecycle being in a waterfall approach and applying UX to that? Because my question is we're moving from a waterfall methodology and now we're going lean, agile, DevOps, and we're trying to do the same thing from an enterprise perspective, but will it get lost in, now that we've changed our system development lifecycle, to agile, that any gains get lost because, oh, well, that's agile and lean, not necessarily UX.
I think I understand what you're saying, but let me start first with we're WAGILE, and meaning that it's waterfall and agile, even though if you asked product engineering, they would say, no, we're agile. No, they're not. Fragile, WAGILE, hybrid, whatever you want to call it. And most organizations aren't doing pure agile to begin with. I think we all can embrace that and tell that dirty story and throw that lie out the window. So because we understood, which just goes back to all the questions I said we're going to have to ask, because we know certain features are going to be being released even between December and the May dates we have, the way we looked at it was we can't control those release dates, and we don't know how long our users will have to acclimate to a new feature before it's released, but we have to be able to do it twice a year. That was our regular cadence for looking what we established. We decided it didn't make any more sense to do it more than that. And then the features that are going to be rolled out we're going to have to see if they're across tasks. We know that some features won't even affect one of the key tasks, and we knew that. But we actually just had to start somewhere. So the actual sprints, we didn't incorporate that into our thinking. We really just thought about from the users, how long have they had to acclimate from the release, starting at the baseline of the first change in December, How long have they had to acclimate? And that's where we're going to have to start from.
I guess my main concern, though, is about the return and quantifying the return from a UX perspective, where this is what UX did to create these returns or your KPI and move the needle, versus it was our change to a different methodology or going more, more agile instead of waterfall, because where UX isn't getting the credit that you're trying to baseline against, to say UX is going to provide this, move this needle on these ROIs.
So you're feeling like the development release cycle is going to impact the user's experience in some way?
Yeah, I do. I think because if you put things out more iteratively and you're lining up in a product model with UX designers, on that, it changes the culture of the way you build and design things versus a traditional waterfall where, hey, you just throw it over the wall and yeah, there's still UX being done. But again, senior management or higher up people saying, well, it's because we moved to agile and we're getting things out quickly and we're learning that way, and getting the credit for moving the needle on, performance indicators versus
I see what you're
it's
saying.
UX doing that.
Well, you should also keep in mind that it's correlation, not causation. So let me try to explain that. We know that UX efforts will not be the only factor affecting the company KPIs. There'll be other things. There'll be macro environmental things. They change an org change, agile, performance improvements. We know that our efforts are only one factor, which is why over time we'll look for the KPI that is the strongest reflection of our efforts. But we know that it can't be in isolation. There will be other factors that contribute as well. So anytime you decide to make that connection between design efforts and company KPIs, it's not going to be a direct causation. It'll be one factor among many, but you're looking for the strongest indicator, and that's the way we approached it.
So I've got a really set of stupid questions. It's more like
No
one
questions are
big one.
stupid. That's what teachers always say. I'm a teacher, so that's what I'm saying. I'm sticking to it.
I preface it anyway with that anyway, so that way I don't feel as dumb asking it. So I work with a division of the federal government where UX has a really tiny budget, and I'd like to be able to contribute into some effort like this to be able to quantify the return on investment. But again, with budgets that are limited, I'm curious if you can help provide some ideas or recommendations as to how to start the conversation to get funding to be able to quantify an effort like this, so that way the federal government can see, oh, we should be investing more time and money on this to be able to get better things out.
That's a great question. I really think that if it wasn't for the redesign and the fact that the redesign, design change hadn't happened in 10 years, we wouldn't have been able to push this idea through. It was just really, and even so, ADP is a big company, but they're cheap. Am I still being recorded? They're frugal. That's a better word. Edit, delete. So really, I had to do a lot of song and dance for this project, and so did my boss. And then even my boss's boss. We purchased UserZoom. Some of you might be aware of the task-based software UserZoom. I did a lot of negotiating with them. I had used them before at my previous company, Kelly Blue Book, when back in 2010 when they were first doing enterprise licenses. So I negotiated hard to get a discount on that software. We also worked, and I had worked with Jeff Sorrow before, to bring him in to do our statistical analysis. So I negotiated with him in terms of bringing him in to do the analysis. So I spent a lot of time showing that I could make a deal so that there was a discount, so that would be something that they could argue up the chain as they asked for money. And even still, it was a big deal to ask for this kind of money, even though it was a small drop in the bucket compared to some of the money that's wasted in other areas, because it's so new to that ideal of UX and spending money on it. They really cried at every penny. I had to pinch every penny. So really, I think I had to show that I was giving them a discount, and the fact that the redesign happened at this opportune time was a real motivator. I don't know if a year and a half in, they would have been as supportive if it wasn't just for a set of circumstances that allowed us to make this project happen. And as I said, there was a lot of pain, a lot of crying, mostly mine, involved.
All right, thank you.
Sorry, I'll be quick. So it sounds like your UX team is an internal team, it's not outsourced. What?
Oh, they're an internal team, yeah.
Okay. Could you elaborate on what are the pros and cons of having UX team being internal to the organization versus it being outsourced to, let's say, a third party?
We could have never done this project if we were outsourced. Actually working with an external source, just internally, because of the silos, because of the complexity of the product, this product is extremely complex. It's not a consumer-facing product where you can look at analytics or bounce rates. I was having a discussion with somebody from Salesforce yesterday, and we were laughing because there's so much complexity. You can have one user go to the platform, and they're seeing something completely different because they're role-based, and their internal administrator at that company only allows them to have certain kinds of view. There's rules and regulations for ADP, particularly this client compliance product. It's taxes, so they're working with the federal government. It's wage garnishment, so they're working with courts. They're working with agencies. They're working with bankruptcy private agencies. So if you were external to ADP, there would be no way to understand the complexity of this product. Internally, every time we think we understand it, it's like an onion. A new layer peels off and we're like, did you know that? No, dude, did you know that? It's really tough. For these kinds of projects, you have to be inside.
Hi. Do you know yet or have a sense of how much of the framework of UX metrics are reusable for other UX projects versus being really specific to this particular redesign?
You mean the specific?
The UX metrics that you developed to use for your assessments.
Oh, they're going to be across that's what we're going to be going with. And we're going to continuously hone in and de-emphasize others. It wasn't meant just for the redesign. It was meant ongoing.
Okay.
That was the intention, was to actually create this framework that we could start using in and honing in. Here are these UX metrics. We measured at this time. Here's the comparison. Having done this kind of benchmark study at Kelly Blue Book when I was there, the strength actually comes in making the first comparison and then making that second comparison. Because everyone's like, yeah, we released this great feature. And then you're finding people are less satisfied. What does that mean? That's when the real discussions start to take place because you have data of your own. Before, you have all these siloed different departments kind of jimming in the data and making it sound better than it is. We have objective data about our users' cross-platform experience that we can measure at these particular times a year, time over time. It's incredibly powerful.
Thank you.
You have 2 minutes.
Hi, could you tell me more about the mood of your stakeholders? At the beginning, you mentioned that you had to show them a little bit more about what is UX, what is UCD. I'm curious from the beginning to the end, the perception that they have.
The perception they have of
On
UX.
the team, correct.
Well,
how much headwind, or was it mixed?
when we came in, it was, okay, we're going to do this thing that's innovative and new, and we want to say as ADP that we're cool and doing new stuff. They actually, the entire innovation center opened the same time our team got together. So there was a lot of enthusiasm behind it, but not a lot of understanding. So it really has been this iterative process of educating them on what UX is and is not. So we really had to, bit by bit, and just the idea of numbers and UX, data and UX is very confusing to them. Because in their mind, well, you guys are supposed to be doing the innovation, cool stuff, whatever that is. They don't really understand that. But then you're bringing in these metrics, And so that's even more confusing. So it's a lot of hand holding. Right now, they're trying to bring together the idea that design is not pretty pictures, it's what people are doing, and you can measure behavior. So it's really this tiny process it's the step-by-step iterative process in training and education all the way up the line. But we luckily get a lot of face time. And the president and the GM comes in, we blog, we do road shows, we really try to get our efforts out there so that they can make themselves look good by talking about our efforts. And then they ask questions, and then we bring in the stuff that we really want to do, like something like this. Thank you. I hope you guys enjoyed my presentation.